Hey, what is going on, people? Welcome to the very first episode of Throwdown Interviews. I'm your host, Tony Polanco, and tonight I'm joined by Emilio Lopez.
Sup, people? Let's do some talking.
All right, so as this is the first episode of this show, I wanted to do things right, kick it off hot, So right now, I want to introduce everybody to Mr. Jordan Miner from PCMag, and he has a very wonderful new book called Video Game of the Year, which we're going to get into. Jordan, how are you, man?
I'm good. I'm feeling good. I was talking with you a lot last week,
yes.
So very, very honored to be on the first episode of this. Yeah, I got my book here. It's back there. It's wherever books are sold. I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yeah, definitely. And like I told you last week, you did the thing, man. Like there's a lot of fellow journalists out there who they talk about, oh, I'm gonna do a book, and like most of them, let's just be honest, don't actually do it. You did it. Like this is a physical thing you can buy right now. Like just tell us. Actually, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. First episode, right? Okay. Before we even get to this book, right? How did you get into gaming? Like into the hobby itself, and obviously, how did that get into your career and everything? And feel free to take as much time as you want to tell us everything.
Well, if I could read from the book for a brief second.
Perfect.
I start off here. The very first line of the introduction is, "I have no clue how long I've liked video games." I was trying to figure out with my parents, when it'd be a good story as to like, oh, how long have you done this? And the closest thing I can remember, so I definitely played the Super Nintendo. My sister had that. And she had an NES, and I thought, because the Super Nintendo was my starting point, when I heard that there was something before that, I'm like, oh, that must be the regular Nintendo. I'm up the Super Nintendo. And then I remember getting for myself a Nintendo 64 with Star Fox 64. That must have been around 97. I was born in 91, if that helps for context. So that was around 97. I definitely remember getting that. But then it was very, it was GameCube times where I was like, kind of like, all right, I'm really into it. I'm like following console generations. And then in 2003 is when I start reading gaming magazines. It wasn't EGM. It was whatever one they had. They had the team had an alternate magazine they did for EB Games. I think it was called GMR, maybe.
I'm not familiar with that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was specifically for, because Game Informer was for at GameStop, so I think EB Games wanted their own sort of in-store competitor. I think they contracted the EGM people to do another magazine, because they were doing games for Windows. They were doing multiple magazines at that team at the time. So I'm reading that magazine. I'm reading a lot about the DS and the PSP. Those are the first kind of upcoming consoles I remember being aware of before they were out. Was those two handhelds. E3 2004 is the first E3 that I watched. I'm watching that. I'm like, oh, okay, I can learn about games before they're even out. That's cool. that's a good way to feel sort of ahead of the game. And people are getting paid to do this, to write about this. Okay, so that's. I was always been interested in writing, divorced from video games. I always wanted to be a writer since kindergarten. But then I started to kind of think, oh, maybe I can combine these two interests. So that's middle school, high school. By the time we get to 2007, I am writing for a Wii fan site. I'm not being paid at all. I'm not picking up the good Wii games. I'm playing, I'm covering the stuff that nobody wants, but it was cool practice. I am just filming. I'm not capturing footage. I'm just taking a camera and pointing it at a TV as I'm playing the Knights sequel that was on the Wii.
Oh wow.
And very badly editing that. 2007, and then 2008, when all the App Store stuff really pops off, there's a real demand for reviews of these iPhone games because there's so many of them. There's so many people who are potentially interested in them, but they don't even know where to begin about what is even good here. There was a real need for reviews of those games. So I start writing for iPhone game review sites, and I start getting paid. I get paid, decent. I was in high school. I was getting paid to play games. I was in study hall just playing iPhone games. It was very impressive when I'm doing college applications. These old doctors that I have nothing in common with otherwise are like, "Oh, son, you got paid money to do this? Good on you." And so I go to Northwestern University, which is a very good journalism school. I studied just actual journalism for 4 years. Like a lot of people I went to school with now work at like CNN and shit, and they're like very super serious journalists. One of them got like arrested at like a protest or something. I'm like, wow, like good on you, but like I'm not about that. I was more about video games.
Yes.
So I write, and like one of my like later classes, I write a really big, a really in-depth reported story about Chicago's game development, because Northwestern's in Chicago. Chicago suburb. And so I read a really in-depth reported feature on Chicago's indie game scene, which is like Octodad and like Threes is another cool mobile game. I sell that story to Kotaku. This was 10 years ago. That was kind of my first like breakout story because it's a big outlet. I sell that story to Kotaku. That kind of gets my name more out there. At the same time, my college does like a residency program. So they put the journalism students to work at a semester at like a real publication. And that is when they put me at PCMag. That was also 10 years ago. And that, now I'm 10 years later, I'm still working there. So with some detours in between, but that's how I get into doing it professionally.
That's wild. 10 years, bro. Wow.
Yeah, I'm not that old. Also.
Yeah, no, but it's not that. It's like that feels like yesterday, because I've known you about that long, like that is some. I think when I met you, you were just like there for like a year or so, because that's nuts. But that's pretty cool. I love that trajectory. How you love playing video games. You're like, hey, people actually get paid to write about this. I like to write. Let's combine it. That's really cool, And then the fact that you went to like actual journalism school, like
arguably the best journalism school.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, man. But going back a little bit, out of like those games, do you remember which one was the first one that you were like, okay, this is a cool art form, like this, like a game that really encapsulated what you thought games were about?
It's my two favorite games. I have two favorite games of all time, and they are StarCraft and they are Smash Brothers. Very, very similar games.
Yeah.
But it was also in the sense of, I guess not, I wasn't really thinking of it in terms of like art yet, but just in terms of how much I was playing those games and how much I was thinking about those games. Both those games involve having to make, like, there's so much expressiveness to those games of like the things you could be doing at any moment. Like, oh, I want to try to get these units in StarCraft, or I'm gonna go for like, like fighting game stuff. It's like I need to play this character this kind of way if I want to succeed, or this character excels at this thing. It's just the creativity of it was really appealing to me at the time, of like just being able to do the different kind of interactions, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's dope, man. And then, going back with your own history, like when did you like decide that you wanted to write a book about gaming history? This is not the first one, obviously, right? So, and there are many, many books about gaming. So when did you decide like, okay, I think I want to like write a comprehensive history of video games?
Okay, this is another kind of long story.
Yeah. We love it.
So,
this is what the show's about, man. Keep on. Let's go.
So, I mean, just as a writer, I've always loved the idea of writing a book one day. And I've had plenty of ideas for books, for novels, and all sorts of stuff. I've always wanted to write a book. When I did my whole story about the fake Street Sharks thing, I don't know, should I explain all of that?
I kind of want to get into that, like, okay. Yeah, because that is, to me, that is still like, I mean, video game of the year aside, that is like your crowning glory as far as I'm concerned.
It's very real. There's a real direct connection between that and this.
Yeah, so yeah, you'll weave it all together, yeah.
I'll try to keep it brief. When I was a kid, there was a website that was like a Wikipedia for TV shows, and it was like user edited. And to edit like important shows, you had to submit like a verification. You had to prove that you were like, you could do it. You know what I mean? You can be just some random person. You had to like prove that you were qualified to edit for that show. But for a show like Street Sharks, if viewers don't remember, a very low rent, bootleg ass Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ripoff from the 90s that no one cares about. For a show like that, no one cares who's editing it. So I started editing it, and I just make it all up. I make up episodes. I say that Henry Winkler was on it. He wasn't. I make up voice actors. I add in stuff that is like sort of plausible from what I remember from watching it, but it's all lies. I do that. that website gets bought by more websites. They take all that bad data and it all spreads all over the internet. So like all of a sudden Netflix is saying the wrong episodes and all these people are lying and saying like, oh, I remember seeing this thing. There was totally a girl Street Shark. Nope, lies. I made it all up. And so, another 10 or 12 years goes by and I finally like, all right, the jig is up. Some people are trying to figure it out. And so for geek.com, I write a whole explainer of everything I did with screenshots and evidence. That story goes a little bit viral. It is noticed by a literary agent who also happened to be working with the spouse of Max. Oh, okay. Working with somebody that I knew. So he realized that he has a connection to me. And he's like, hey, you seem like a cool writer. You have any books or anything? And I had a book at the time. And I said, hey, I got this. And he's like, this isn't good enough for your debut. I'm an amateur writer. It's not totally polished. But, he's like, I still like you. I still want to work with you. So I signed with him. We tried some stuff. A lot of rejections, as it is in publishing, years and years. We get our union at PCMag. So this whole time I was pitching like fiction. Because I thought I couldn't do a video game thing because that's my day job. I thought it would like conflict maybe. We get our union. It lays out. I help write the contract. It lays out what we are allowed to do for like outside work. It creates like rules for that. It makes it very clear. So now I know, okay, I can do it if I do it like this, as I get permission, and the union will back me up if anyone tries to get to, like, oh, you can't do that. Like, well, why not? Like, let me do it. Like, shut up. So that's all laid out. I give him some video. I give him like a couple of video game pitches, and this is the one that we felt the most confident about, and it worked out.
Yeah. I didn't know the whole Street Sharks thing actually helped the birth of this book. That's kind of cool, But no, it's great. It's like that shows your writing chops. Like you were so good that people believed your lies.
Right, because it was written to sound like a bad '90s cartoon plot. A little bit messed up of like they wouldn't do an episode where one of the sharks is in like a coma, right? That's a little the kids be too heavy for the kids.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny, man. But yeah, so yeah, we got video game of the year. So how did you? This is something I wanted to ask you actually last week when you were doing all the awesome signings and stuff. Like, how did you bring it together? Because I know you it's not really like a full outline. It's not like a novel, right? So like, How did you come together? Like, what came first? Because I know you wanted to have specific themes, but you had to have. You were kind of restrained by certain years and what games came out. So yeah, could you just tell us about the process of putting the whole book together?
Sure. So nonfiction differs from fiction in that when you're trying to sell a novel, you have to have it totally written before you can even like show it to anybody. But for nonfiction, you can sell it to a publisher with just like an elaborate proposal. So my agent and I, with some feedback from this publisher that was interested, they were like, we might like this, but can you give us this, give us XYZ? And they wanted, like some information on me. They wanted a sample chapter, and they wanted the entire list and like a sort of like thesis, I keep saying, of like what each chapter would be about. So I had to come up with that before the book was even sold. And so that was a whole process of just, like, here's the years, and here's me whittling down this list of, some stuff just obviously needs to be in there. Super Mario Brothers, Final Fantasy VII, Fortnite and Minecraft should be in there because this is a book for like everybody. So to get some stuff that everybody recognizes. And also, that's a big part of gaming. The stuff that breaks out really big is an important part of video games to talk about. So some of that stuff just kind of, had to be there. And then just kind of seeing what years I had and kind of just filling in the gaps of like, not just picking like the best game, but my overarching goal was to tell the whole story of video games as best I could, as like comprehensive as I could. I wanted to have the best variety of all kinds of genres, all the different publishers I could think of, from like indie and AAA and just all that. I just have the most variety I could think of, and to try to make sure that every game I picked could like kill as many birds with like one stone as possible, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatest examples of that, because again, you know how gamers, they love to get literal about stuff. Like, not every game of the year here is an actual game of the year. And like the best example is Spore. As you said, this is not a game that will be game of the year any year, but it opened the door to a larger conversation about, you know, the hype culture that's like just so prevalent in games.
Yeah, the whole list, the whole award format is really like a Trojan horse to really, the history is the point here. It's about the discussion of the game, not whether or not you agree that this is like the best game or not.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, do you think have you even gotten any kind of responses like that? Hey, that shouldn't be game of the year.
Yeah. I mean, it's a Spore I got. Or, you know, in a year like 1998, somebody's like, why didn't you pick Half-Life? And Half-Life is a fantastic game. That would have been a totally great pick. But also, you know, so was Metal Gear Solid. And each chapter has like a runner-up pick. And like StarCraft is in 98. And Ocarina of Time is in 98. And like RE2 and Pokemon Red and Blue. So what was cool about the format to me is also that it forced me to make hard cuts and have games in there that you might not expect. And to cut games that you might not expect either.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because, you know, if you were to pick like everybody's favorite game of the year, this book would be like 5,000 volumes or something. Like, you know, yeah. So I think you did it the smartest way possible, where you have a select bunch of titles, right? Some runners up, but it all ties it together into the grand history of gaming.
And it'd be kind of boring, I think, if everything was just what you'd expect. I thought of it kind of like a fighting game roster, in that, or like a crossover fighting game roster of like, you want to have, like when you do like a Marvel game or whatever, you got to have all your, you know, Captain America's, Wolverine, Spider-Man, whatever. But like, you got to have like Shuma Gorath in there too. You got to have your like weirdo, because you're not going to get everybody's favorite ever. Like you'll never please everybody. So you got to do some weird stuff to kind of keep people interested, I think.
Yeah, you got to have Dalsum in there, you know?
Yeah. Or Blackheart.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of need those, yeah. Yeah, Ehon, I don't know if he's too weird though. But yeah, so how long did it take to, like, you know, before you even wrote it, like just to put it all together, you know, before you actually like really got down and dirty? Because I would imagine there's a lot of research I went into it, just selecting the games and all this other stuff.
Well, I had a lot of motivation. Once the publisher was like interested, I had a lot of motivation of like, okay, let me like work on this like nonstop, so they don't like lose interest, or that we can like sell this right away. So I was working pretty like nonstop during, it was just like early 2021 where all these first talks were happening. And, you know, because I didn't have to write the whole thing, I was just like, I didn't have to like really edit it super intensely. You know, I could just be like, these are the games, and this is kind of like my like one sentence pitch for them, which kind of ends up being the subheads of like, Tetris is important because it's like handheld games, and also it being from Soviet Russia is interesting in a Cold War kind of context. You know, but on the other side, the sample chapter did go through a lot of edits, even more so than some of the stuff in the final book, because we wanted to really nail. It's like the pilot for a TV show. We had to really nail that chapter to sort of be like, all right, this is going to be the format, and then the rest can kind of mirror this. But like just figuring out exactly what that format was going to be with that first chapter, which was Destiny. Actually, was the chapter that sold the book. That took some revisions, and I'm grateful for my agent. He gave a lot of good writing advice. Along with the business advice.
Destiny, that's pretty interesting right there. But one of the cool things I like about the book is like, not only are you like going through the history of gaming, but you're also talking about what's happening in culture, in society at the time too, because, you know, games aren't just living off in their own bubble. Like, they are reflective of the time. So, and I think Tetris is a great example of that. Like, you get to talk about the Cold War, which was the thing for decades and decades. And then obviously, you know, with the early games in the 70s, you get to talk about some of that, you know. So was there anything that, you know, because like you said, you were born in 1991. Was there anything that you kind of learned in terms of like history that you're like, oh, I didn't know that, you know, and something that the research of this book helped you to learn?
The example I keep giving is the 1979 chapter, which is on this game called Speed Freak, which was a very early vector graphics racing game. And I hadn't heard of it until I started researching. I was like, oh, I just try to get a racing game in here somewhere. And I saw that as one of the first ones. And that was cool to me because I always think it's interesting how new consoles tend to launch with a racing game to show off their specs. It was interesting to see, even from the very beginning of the racing genre, a racing game was being used to show off, in this case, vector graphics technology.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah, because again, that's part of the history of gaming. A lot of people kind of forgotten that, those vector graphics type of games.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, like, this might be a little tough because obviously you probably like every single chapter that you've written equally, but like, was there one specifically that you wrote that you like, man, that was fun?
I really like the Super Meat Boy chapter. Because that is a game. That's another game that fills that checks a lot of boxes. I feel it's a cool game. I like it a lot. It is an indie game. I feel like I wanted to make sure I get a decent amount of indie games in there. An indie game that's really from that like Xbox Live Arcade era where it was like really blowing up. Like downloadable games on consoles is a real thing now. It was in that indie game, the movie. It was highlighted, and I like it better than Braid, so I picked that over Braid. But it satisfies that. It also represents, I think, like an apotheosis for like flash gaming and like Newgrounds kind of gaming. I think that is an underappreciated part of game history is like these kind of like web games, especially now that you can't use Flash. Like Flash is just dead on the web.
Not totally.
It's not what it used to be in at the early internet. So it was cool to talk about that scene and even like Flash cartoons and my affinity for those. And I got Tom Fulp, who is the founder of Newgrounds, and he's worked on his studio has made like Alien Hominid and Castle Crashers, and so he's in the book as well. And so it was cool to get that in there.
That's nice. And yeah, go ahead.
Fun side note: out in I live out in PA. The Newgrounds offices is actually not that far. It's a town
nice.
over from me.
Nice.
Yeah,
he's a cool dude. Yeah, he wrote about Gunstar Heroes.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that game. Yeah, no, that's pretty fun. That it. And by the way, I almost forgot. Like, Flash games were a thing. Like,
especially on Newgrounds.
Yeah, but they were big for a while. For obvious reasons. And then obviously, even though you have written this book, you have a lot of people. Like, I kind of call this like a rap album. It's like you got everybody in there, like the greatest collaboration of all time. So yeah, what was that like? I mean, it was probably somewhat easy. You knew a bunch of people and stuff, but like, was there like, did you just go to people like, okay, what game do you want to talk about? Or did you go, I think you should talk about this? Like, for me, you asked me, what game do I want to talk about? But was there anyone that you go, okay, maybe this person should talk about this game? Like, was there anything like that happened?
No, I wanted to leave it wide open for people. My only rule was I didn't want people to write about another game somebody had picked. So I had a document at some point of like, here's what's been picked. But anything beyond that, like, go nuts. I really wanted to give you all a lot of freedom with this. Write whatever you were passionate about. Some people though would give me like, hey, I could write about these like 4 or 5 games, and I would pick from there. I would pick what I wanted to pick. Like Alex Navarro from Nextlander. He showed me some games. I said, you should write about the wrestling game because I hate wrestling, but it's an important part of gaming, so somebody should write about it, and you are an expert on it. Yeah. So in those cases, I would do a little bit of curating there. But beyond that, I wanted to give people as much freedom as possible to pick whatever they wanted. As main chapter picks, I feel, are pretty famous, pretty well-known games. And I thought this would be a cool way to get some stuff that was more obscure, potentially.
Yeah. Well, did you get anybody that you didn't personally know? Like, did that happen, or did you know everybody, like, personally?
So Joe Zieha, who's in the book, he is a voice actor. He is in Fire Emblem 3 Houses, actually, and he's in some other games. He's a voice actor. He's also an author. He's written some sci-fi novels, and we had the same agent. My agent connected me with him to get him the book. I didn't know him personally, but that was a cool get from him.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, because I know if I was in that position, I'd be like, hey, I'm writing this book, and I already got all these other people. Would you be interested? It'll be an excuse to just meet people like that I admire.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, that's what we wanted to do while we were coming with the concept, and yeah, it definitely made me bolder in approaching people that I maybe didn't know, or maybe only like had followed me on Twitter, but don't really know me. Of like, hey, want to be in this? So yeah, it gave me a lot of confidence in approaching people for sure.
Yeah, I could imagine. It's like I got all these other people. You know,
Yeah.
you want to join in on the fun. You know, so I want to go back to something you said. You know, games you hate. You know, and by the way, I am asking you some stuff that we talked about at the show because it was really good stuff. Yeah,
Dude, I have a whole document of talking points.
Yeah.
On this other monitor.
That's
So
that's
it's all
fantastic.
good.
All right.
It's new to the listeners.
Yeah, exactly. I want everybody to really understand where you're coming from with this. But you do not make it a secret that you are not a fan of the Souls games. That's not really your thing. And I know you wrote about Sekiro in this book, but you also wanted to have somebody that actually loved the genre. So can you tell us about that? Because I really liked how you said that some of the things that were written. I believe it was for Demon Souls. You felt it was so well written and it made you understand, like, okay, that's why people love these games. So yeah, I guess explain why don't you like those games, and then how did reading about different perspective made you maybe appreciate them a little more.
Sure. So I just have I don't like the way those games approach difficulty. It's less that they're hard and that I feel like I'm just spending a lot of time and not getting. I don't like to feel like I'm wasting time in a game. So I can play a game like Cuphead where I die and it's really quick, I'm back in it, and the ultimately beating a level, even if you take a lot of tries to get there, or like Meat Boy, it's only like a few minutes. But I feel like with Souls games, I just spend so much time, and you can just lose so much progress so quickly. I don't like how they approach animation. It's kind of my problem with Monster Hunter too. For a long time, I feel like the animation priority makes everything feel very sluggish in a way that I don't like. I don't really value difficulty that much in a game. I can appreciate it, but it's not like the number one thing for me when a game is hard. So I just get annoyed by them and I just move on to something else. But these Souls games are very important. They're very influential. They've been around for like a long time now. So it was very important for me to get that into the book and to talk about that and to talk about why other people may like them and to talk about that it's okay to have, you can recognize something is good even if you don't like it, and to have differing opinion on it is totally fine. And it also is my way of talking about like cheat codes and stuff. Like just gaming difficulty as a topic in general is talked about a lot in that chapter. So that was kind of the point there. And then like you said, Scott Benson, who's an indie developer, he worked on Night in the Woods, and Tamor Hussein from GameSpot, they wrote about Demon Souls and Bloodborne, and they love those games, and they're really good essays about how they enjoy that the game kind of knocks you down and makes you really work for it and really feels like an accomplishment. And I totally respect that. I get that out of some games, other difficult games I get that out of, but I don't get it out of those games. But it's cool that they do, and they wrote really, really beautiful essays explaining why.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you had that in there because it shows both sides of the equation. It's like, this is why some people may not like these games. This is why some people really love these games. Right.
It's not about who's correct. It's not about this is the one choice. It's about just talking about games.
Yeah. And I want to talk to you about Street Fighter because that is a game that's very near and dear to both me and Emilio here, right? We played that a lot, and you picked the correct one, our favorite. You know which one that is, right? Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So yeah, this is just a little off topic, but I just want to know your history with that game specifically because obviously you got into it a little bit later. So how did you get into it, and then why did you decide that's the one that needs to be in this book?
I probably played it on Super Nintendo, I guess. I'm not even sure if it was that version. I'm not entirely sure if it was that version or not. But I definitely played Street Fighter on Super Nintendo. But why I picked that version, it's the best version, like you said. And it allowed me to talk about a thing in fighting. The fact that fighting games have these new versions of themselves is a thing in the genre. I talk about that in that chapter as well, and how these days that's kind of been supplanted by DLC and patches and stuff. But at the time, if you wanted to balance the game or add new stuff, you had to just release a whole ass new version every year. And I thought that was an interesting thing about fighting games, and I wanted to talk about there. It also let me move that chapter to 94, so then I could free up 91 for some other games I wanted to talk about. That was part of the larger strategy of let me get this game into this year so I could talk about Sonic the Hedgehog and Wolfenstein in these earlier chapters. So
yeah, I didn't think about that. That is interesting. You're right, because most people would probably just put Street Fighter 1991, but it's like that version of Street Fighter, while monumental, it isn't what it would become later, you know?
Right. Or like you couldn't say, or even how Street Fighter 2 is kind of like another, Street Fighter 1 was not the game. So even like that, this iteration is built into the franchise from the beginning.
Yeah, no, you're right about that, because Street Fighter 1 is absolutely not like Street Fighter 2, and that game, changed everything. And yeah, I do want to talk to you about Fortnite, because I noticed at the book signings, I got a little bit of like, oh, what the fuck, but you're right. It's like, this is literally one of the biggest games on the planet. How could you not talk about that? Like, tell us about Fortnite, with regard to how it fits into the larger gaming narrative.
Sure. That game just became a massive pop culture phenomenon. It's got like millions and millions of players. It's become this massive crossover of like all IP ever. They do like civil rights lectures in Fortnite sometimes, and like an Ariana Grande concert. It's like the actual metaverse. Like all these companies are wasting all this money trying to chase that. This is the thing that's actually closest to pulling it off. That also talks about just Epic's whole history. It talks about the Unreal Engine and stuff. And it's also the chapter for Battle Royale games. So it talks, that chapter talks about PUBG, it talks about, Apex Legends. That's a really dominant kind of modern genre, and that this is the best way I think of talking about it. And people have heard of Fortnite, so they will see that. They'll look at the back of this book and be like, oh, I may not know about the secret of Monkey Island, but I know about Fortnite, so maybe I'll check this out.
But that's an interesting balance too, because it's like, for like, I guess for lack of a better term, like regular people, like they know Fortnite, they really like it. But then like when it comes to like our circles, right, we're like, like we poo-poo it or whatever. I know I do, but so it's kind of cool how you balance like something that's like super, like you got some stuff in here that's like, kind of like, even though Sekiro sold a lot, that's not exactly mainstream, but then you have like, stuff like that, and Pac-Man, which is like ultra mainstream, so that's kind of cool that you have that balance in there, because again, gaming isn't just about big AAAs and all that other stuff, nor is it just indies, it's everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I try to approach just being a games writer. I just try to play as much as I can and try to be as aware as I can. That's why I like that I reviewed a lot of iPhone games. A lot of them were really bad, but I have a pretty good understanding of that scene. I love Nintendo's games, but I listen to you guys like every week, so I can get that other side of it too, so I can stay balanced. I try to present the most comprehensive thing I could, and that that involves both getting really deep into gamer stuff and then being also aware of when I should try to break out of it as well. Yeah,
for sure. Speaking about Nintendo, obviously because you genuinely love Nintendo, right? There's a lot of representation in this book about Nintendo. So the way I see it, it's twofold. Not only is it because, hey, this is a Jordan Miner book, there's going to be a lot of Nintendo representation, right? Nintendo is extremely important for the industry. If it wasn't for Nintendo, video games may not even be here right now, at least in North America. Like, obviously, the gaming crash that happened in North America didn't happen in Japan, right? They were trucking along just fine, but obviously Nintendo is a huge part of this industry. So how did you go about selecting the Nintendo games that would be in here? Because you could literally write an entire book just on Nintendo,
Yeah, I had to make sure that I did. Again, I had to make sure I got everybody I could. They've made so many games, and they've made so many different types of games that can be just emblematic of what I wanted to talk about. So like I talk about Wii Sports, like the Wii, like that as a whole phenomenon is something that's worth talking about. I talk about Animal Crossing as like this game that really captured like pandemic zeitgeist stuff. Pokemon Go is the only Pokemon game in the book, and it's also the only mobile game that gets a main chapter, and those are like huge things that should be talked about. I just love Smash Brothers, and that chapter is also about how, gameplay aside, I think something that is admirable about that game is the way it really cares for those franchises and really respects them and showcases like a love for like a whole range of gaming franchises in a way that's like a museum. That's what I talk about in the Smash Brothers chapter. Games like Donkey Kong in the arcade and Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda, like these are just like Mario 64 for like 3D gaming. Like these are just like cornerstone, I think just undeniable games of the year in what they've done for gaming. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so right now, just full disclosure, I'm still making my way through the book, but I'm assuming you got into the original console war, right? Sega versus Nintendo.
Yeah. That's the Sonic chapter. That's
Yeah.
That's the Sonic the Hedgehog chapter. So I could have picked Mario World there, and I didn't. So I picked Sonic.
Yeah, I think that was because again, you have so many Nintendo games, you kind of have
Right,
to
yeah.
throw Sega a bone, Yeah. So actually, what's your take on the original console war? Because obviously you heard about it after the fact. Me and Manny we were living that shit.
We lived it.
Yeah, we lived it back then. So yeah, what was your take on it? Like reading about it after the fact. Like, by the way, have you read Console Wars by Blake J. Harris? That is such a great book. So and like even for me, I'm like, oh, it filled in so many things I didn't know. But yeah, what's your take on the the original Console War? And I'm calling it the original because obviously the one we know now is Xbox versus PlayStation. So what do you think of the original Console War and how that kind of played out?
Interesting. So like you said, I wasn't really seeing that firsthand, and actually, I remember all my friends when we got GameCubes, they all bought Sonic Adventure 2, and they were really excited for it. So I had no conception of like these are things that are supposed to be like in conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of asking too, like, the way I could give my commentary on, like, the Peloponnesian War or something. Like, yeah, I can give my thoughts, but I wasn't there. So, yeah, just like in a historical standpoint, like you looking back at it, like, was there anything that kind of, you thought like, oh, that I guess things were different back then?
It's different in that the consoles used to be really different. So like picking one was like a big deal. You would get different versions of the same games, and it's a really different experience. Back then, I think gamers as a whole were, because games were younger. I think most people who play games probably on average were younger at the time too. So there's kind of this sort of like playground mentality about it. And also you just can't afford to get multiple consoles. The fact that the companies really leaned into it, all their marketing stuff, all their like edgy Mario was so slow, blah blah blah, and then Nintendo trying to copy that, but they're like edgy, like I talk about this in the Donkey Kong chapter, like I feel like Donkey Kong Country was them trying to be a little edgier, not necessarily working.
Yeah, you're right. And ironically enough, that's the game that ended the console war. Like,
right.
Yeah, because like they were actually neck and neck for a while, right? Sonic really blew things up, but when that game came out, Donkey Kong, that was it. Like it was over. Yeah. People were like, we want that game, and obviously it was both. Not only did games not look like that at the time, the game was just fun. It was just great, and Sega couldn't hang, But you did bring up a good point because obviously right now the big console war stuff is Xbox for replacing. But at the end of the day, both consoles are the same. They're kind of giving you the same experiences. But back then, Genesis was just built completely architecturally different than a Super Nintendo. So that's why, like you said, you had literally two versions of Aladdin made by two different companies. They have nothing to do with each other. I don't know if you know this because Shinji Mikami, he helped make the Capcom one, right, on Super Nintendo. He even says he likes the Genesis version better, which is pretty interesting.
I mean, it's a hard act to follow if you get Disney animators to animate your game. So
right.
Yeah.
I do think ultimately, at least at the time, I mean, you can argue about what it's dumb now, but I think it was a good thing at the time to break up Nintendo's hegemony. It's good to have, it's good to have multiple consoles in the market. Like, I mean, it was good that, going back to Atari, like Atari made the console and they made all the games and they tried to sue, the people that would become Activision when they left Atari, like a third party, like, no, we'll sue you. You stole from us. So it's important to get that going to expand the market, to have third parties. And it's also important to have multiple console makers. So.
Yeah. And that's the other thing I wanted to ask you, because you have a chapter on Pitfall, and that was your way of talking about Activision. And I thought that was so slick because, like, you kind of get to talk about the modern stuff that's going on, but you worded it in a way to kind of, not like, because this book is like, you could say it's evergreen, basically. Like, you want it to be something that'll go down in the annals of history, but so you kind of worded it, weirdly, so you didn't go, like, oh, the Activision case one or the other. Like, obviously, we know what it is now, which is interesting because even when the book released, we still didn't fully know yet. Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I had a whole running list of edits up until like we couldn't change the book anymore. Of like, as close to update as possible. I wrote the Monkey Island chapter and was like, We're seeing Monkey Island again. Disney bought it. It's over. And then they announced that new one last year that came out. And I'm like, oh, never mind. Here it is. It's back.
Yeah, but it's cool because the Pitfall chapter kind of weaves in all the other action adventure games that would eventually come down the line. So, again, it's like, hey, if you want to read about Uncharted, we got it in here. It's just not the way you maybe would expect,
There's also the Uncharted chapter. There's an Uncharted chapter.
Yeah.
There's no Tomb Raider chapter.
There's no Tomb Raider. That's interesting. Yeah.
But there's an Uncharted chapter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, I'm making my way through it. Go ahead.
I'm sure the Tomb Raider chapter is the Mario 64 chapter.
Yeah, for 96. Yeah.
Yeah, because those were the two games that really showed people a 3D explorable world. I know for a lot of people they had Mario 64. For me, it was Tomb Raider on Sega Saturn. It was just like, wait, I could just go anywhere? This is crazy, and then obviously, was it 5 years after the fact, you had GTA 3, and it's like, whoa, I really can go anywhere, which is pretty cool.
To see that evolution in writing the book, just to see how stuff would jump so drastically in 4 or 5 years was really cool to see, in retrospect.
Yeah, for sure. You talked, we were talking about Aladdin, the animations and all that. I want to talk about the art that you have in this book because it is really cool. I don't know if people can see it. There we go. It's really cool. So yeah, can you tell us about the artist, and was there any kind of visual theme that you wanted to portray with the art in the book?
Sure. So the publisher Abrams, they do a lot of art books in general. They're very good at it. They do they just had the Art of Spider-Verse that just came out. So they're really good at doing really art heavy books. So from the beginning, the goal was to have a lot of art in the book. Since we're not going to put screenshots or something, but we need something to convey what the game looks like. So yeah, they had some artists that they work with that they presented to me, and I picked Ren McDonald, who was my favorite. I really like his style. I thought it was a good way because we were looking for a style that could unify games that are otherwise very different looking. We need a style that could work as well for Pong as it could for The Witcher 3. Thought he did a good job of that. He presented some different kind of directions to go in, and we end up doing a mix of some where this group of characters are in the game. They're characters in the game, and to kind of get to see them the environments and they got sucked into it or something. And I think that's cool. But there's also illustrations where you can see the characters playing the game. I like those as well because you can see the consoles. There's some nostalgia there of seeing the giant Xbox controller or the Atari joystick or whatever. But getting that in there was cool. There's some cool period details. In the Mario 64 one, she has a Beanie Baby, so it's the late 90s. So yeah, I think Ren really knocked it out of the park. I really that was it was a way for the book. The thing about writing a book is that I write it, so I already know what's in it. I already know what I'm going to put in it, so it's not really surprising to me to read it. But as the art was coming in, I would be like, oh, what's this gonna look like? So it was a way to be surprised by the book. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, speaking about the personal art, this is one of my favorites, the Legend of Zelda chapter. I'm like, hey, that's Jordan.
Right. Yeah.
That is so cool.
I was just just make sure because we saw some sketches. It was kind of just placeholder stick figures or whatever. I'm just just make sure the people in the pictures are not all white people. Get a mix of people.
Yeah,
in there.
That's good, and that's a question I'm going to ask you about in a little bit. One chapter that I found was really cool because I've never talked to you about this game before. Dragon Quest, you added in here, and I think you made the right choice when it comes to Japanese RPGs. There was obviously Japanese RPGs before that, but that's the one that really cemented things. A lot of people don't know this, but there was a lot of action RPGs, right? That were happening at that time. But when that game came out, most people were like, okay, everything's turn-based now. It's not because the limitations of the hardware. That's kind of the fallacy. It's no, they had action RPGs, right? It's just this game really brought it all together. But yeah, what was Dragon Quest a game you played growing up, or was it a game you felt that needed to be included in here?
It was a game I felt needed to be in there. I'm not a huge JRPG person personally, but it was a game that I felt really needed to be in there. As you said, as a foundational RPG text, the way it synthesized these sort of Eastern and Western ideas. From Dungeons and Dragons, kind of tabletop gaming, and like wizardry and stuff, and like this need, like Yuji Horí's sort of like visual novel kind of background. So the way that he synthesized those and to make it as an experience that could work on a console, I think was really important and as a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, because that's a game like I finally like first played it a few years ago, and even though it's simple by today's standards, like it really like it brought a lot of things that we kind of take for granted all together. It's like simple menu, you level up and all this other stuff. There's your like standard quests and all that, and like you had a game like Wizardry, they had those elements, but it was just very. It was a lot. It was kind of difficult. This one is like, and they were also restrained by the hardware in this sense. Like you only had 2 buttons basically, so you had to make everything work. And that's something I really want people to kind of take away from this book too. It's like, yeah, things were very different back then, and the things that happened back in the day kind of helped inform what happened now. Even though we have it kind of well, in that sense, like they were working under a lot of restrictions back then.
Right, and not everything that is there's sometimes there are things that it's not the first thing, but the thing that breaks through is like World of Warcraft wasn't the first MMO, but the way that broke through is certainly very significant. And that did by like streamlining some things and making some things easier to understand for more people.
Yeah, which is something Halo did obviously as well. There was a lot of first person games on consoles didn't work right, and then that game showed everybody like, okay, this is how you do it.
Right, totally.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. The other thing I want to talk about is this is obviously a physical book which you could hold in your hand, which is dope. Yeah, and I'm really glad you did, because a lot of publishers, a lot of the authors nowadays, especially, they kind of go the easy route and just, hey, here's a digital book and all that. Nothing wrong with that, obviously. I'm an e-reader myself. Like I that's how I prefer it. But at the same time, there's something to be said about this, and I really want you to talk about this, because there's not only do you want your own book physically, right? But it's like, as you said, a lot of people who are in this book, myself included, the first time I'm like, I'm actually in a actual thing. It's not just online, So yeah. So how important was that to you to have something that will just live on physically for who knows how long?
Very, like you said, yeah. I've been an online writer for my whole career. So, and I've worked for websites that don't really exist anymore. I've had writing that you can't really find without like Internet Archive or something. Oh yeah, to have like 300 pages of my thoughts, like my whole thoughts on like so many games in one thing, is very satisfying and very like, all right, it's I got it out there, it exists now. I can rest, I guess. But yeah, and to provide that platform for all these other writers was very satisfying as well. And y'all gave very excellent writing that I'm really happy to have in the book.
Definitely, man. And then that leads me to the other point, because obviously there's a few games here that people can't access anymore, which is very troubling. I remember the week your book launched, earlier that week, there was a report that came out that said 87% of video games released in North America, you cannot play them at all. There's absolutely no way to play them in any way, shape, or form. Very sad. So I wanted to get your thoughts on game preservation right now, because I personally feel it's a sorry state.
Yeah, it's like it's horrifying. You think that, and you should. Video games are an art form. They're not just a product to be sold. They're an art form. They're cultural artifacts that have value. Again, that have value beyond just the money they make. I feel really strongly about that. So they should be preserved. There should be a way to save their artistry and what they could teach people for like next generations of creators and people who just appreciate games. It's not unique to games. I think the figure out there is that like half of all movies before like 1950 or something are just lost. Libraries have been burned down. I'm sure there's lots of ancient texts. I'm sure we're very ignorant to all sorts of human history. Video games, but like the speed at which we're losing games, like games that have existed within our lifetimes, there's no excuse that the games from like, I think that study you mentioned, it uses like 2010 as the cutoff date for like a retro game. There's no excuse for so many games that are so recent to be just loss beyond just the companies don't value it, and I think that's just a disgrace, frankly.
It's a long standing issue with the industry itself, because in general, a lot of times they're not really thinking about preservation. They're just thinking about getting the product out. So you think about it, like with how much money some of these companies spend on it, you would think you would keep your source code in a good place. Just on the occasion you needed to do something with it, but they weren't thinking about any of that sort of stuff. And a lot of cases we still see it. You hear like stuff like Square Enix losing the the source code to Kingdom Hearts, a game that's not very old, but they had to redevelop. They had to redevelop the game. Same thing with Final Fantasy X. They had to redevelop the games because they just lost it. Yeah,
it's pathetic. Yeah, yep. And I'll say this again, and it's not right the way Nintendo treats its library. The way it gets people, it dangles in front of people, takes them back. All these like limited time things, whatever. I hate that. But I think that they at least, in a cynical way, like know the value of their stuff. And that's why they do it. So I would not be shocked if they actually, on their own end, have their stuff pretty well preserved. They're just not going to give it to a library or a museum the way that they should.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Go ahead.
or they're going to those RIP sites and just literally pulling the RIPs down and offering them on their stores.
Right.
Oh my God. Yeah, but again, like you said, this is a problem that's been going on forever. I remember the first instance I could recall of like me going, wait, what? How do you lose a game was for Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Sega Saturn, right? Like, yeah. like my mind couldn't even process. I'm like, what do you mean you lost the source code? But apparently, as I learned, that's common. How do you lose Kingdom Hearts?
Yeah, like it's like a matter of self-respect at that point. Of like, you made this.
Yeah. A lot of times, sometimes the people that made these games are not there to point out what's what. I don't think a lot of times if they let go of a whole game studio, like who knows where anything is? It's probably just just thrown into a box somewhere in a cabinet they couldn't get. I've had some experience with Konami over some past stuff, and they were just like, oh wait, this. Oh wait, we have this. Oh, we didn't know we had that. Stuff like that. So they really needed I think Sony had a thing about it pretty recently that they hired an archivist to essentially go through all of their stuff and sort of maybe look at what they had and maybe figure out what they have and don't have and see what they can do with it. So.
Yeah. And Xbox has been pretty good about it as well, I think, because they're starting from a more modern position of from the Xbox, the original Xbox. I almost said Xbox One.
We used to call it the Xbox One back in the day until Xbox One came out. But I don't know. It just seems to me like digital games are like a double-edged sword. Like they should be a great way to preserve games, but they also devalue games in a weird way. So I don't know. I told you this before. It's like if you could 50 years from now, you could still get a physical copy of Super Mario Brothers and put it in a Nintendo that's still working, and that's fine. But if you buy like a new game that needs 50 million patches,
or if it's like a service game that can only exist in the game itself changes every other day. Like what even is how would you archive Fortnite? Like what does that even mean?
How would you archive that? You know?
Or stuff like Metal Gear Solid 4, which had an online mode, which they literally had to patch out of the game in one of the things. So every future release of the game doesn't have that other part of the game in there anymore, because it was in that era where they had to put an online mode into every single game.
Yeah. Ironically, you bring up Metal Gear Solid 4 because you can't even play that anywhere.
Nope.
You need a PS3 to play that game still.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that they will try to get that working for this legacy thing, because otherwise, why even do it? And
that's the telltale sign is they call it Volume 1. So what is Volume 2? Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 4, and Metal Gear 5, right?
Yeah, because otherwise, why say it? Yeah, why phrase it like that?
Yeah, why put a number on it if there's only going to be one? No, I think there'll be another one.
Yeah, so I hope so, because that's one of my favorite games. But again, it's like it would be nice if more companies were just more proactive about this stuff. Like, can we please start, preserving games? Again, there's still physical space in in cyber world or whatever. It's like in the internet, you could have everything on servers and all that. So I don't know. I would ask you what the solution would be, but if you could find a solution, you'd be a millionaire or something. So it's a difficult challenge,
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not in a state that every consumer can necessarily get at, I just want to know that the game is preserved somewhere, like it's in like a library or something. Like, and I don't have to be able to readily access it myself, but at least have that much respect for your own art form and creators to make sure that it's going to last for a while. And then maybe get into like the public domain or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
I know GOG has been doing that for a while now. Where essentially getting older PC games to work. One example is the Blade Runner game that they did that came out years ago. That they had an actual working version of it that would work on modern systems, and yeah.
Yeah, there are people doing that work for sure. There was, I think, pretty recently. I think Limited Run Games announced some sort of new engine that they had made, and that's what this they're doing like a Gex remaster or something.
Okay, that's random.
It's running on.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are people doing that work for sure. But yeah, it needs to be bigger, concerted, like industry-wide effort, and it needs to be the thing where it's like primary goal isn't necessarily to make money. It should be. It's just a good thing to do for its own sake, but not the world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem. The reason we're not seeing these efforts is because they're not going to get a lot of money off of it. So they're like, okay, whatever. That's why we only get remakes of like big games that they know people are going to buy. That's why you're going to get like Street Fighter or whatever forever, but you're not going to get But then I don't want Gex, so that could stay. That could stay in the past.
But it has a right to exist. It should exist somewhere. Yes,
yeah, I agree with that. You got me thinking about Gex. I always associate that game with the 3DO, right? Do you have anything in here about consoles that tried and failed? Do you have anything like that in here?
I mean, I have there's a side chapter on Madden, and that talks about EA, and Trip Hawkins was like with the 3DO, right?
Yep.
So there's a bit of that there. It's mostly about who won.
yeah. I mean, that's who writes history, right?
No Jaguar section.
Yeah. I mean, it talks about. I mean, in the Wii Sports chapter, it talks about kind of these like emote competitors that I think kind of fizzled out. Like the Move controllers and how the Kinect really messed up Xbox for like a whole generation. The Wii U not even be able to recapture the same thing as the Wii. So there's a bit of that in there as well. There's a side chapter on ET as a pretty famous failure for sure.
Yeah, it's funny how like that was a rumor for a while that there was a landfill filled with the games. That was a rumor, and then it turned out no, it's real. The games are actually there. But again, like you said, that game also has a right to exist, right?
Yeah,
as bad as it is,
and as bad as it is. But thinking about like the guy who actually created it, like he created it in an utter crunch.
Yeah,
like it's surprising that the game is even working with the amount of time that the guy had. So
he wrote a book as well, I think, about his
yeah. Kind of wild how video game crunch is still a thing all these decades later. That's pretty upsetting too, man.
I mean, the thing about it is, it's like as long as you're creating something, there's going to be something. Whether you do it on yourself or it's something, but it becomes dangerous when it starts to become mandatory. So
yeah, for sure.
It's just labor. Labor is just labor, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. All right. So we're coming up on our hour. The last thing I want to ask you, I didn't ask you this at the signings because it's just kind of could be seen as corny, but I genuinely want to know this. Like, what do you want? Like, when somebody reads this book, when they finish it, what do you want them to walk away with? Like, what do you want them thinking? What do you want them feeling? Like, what do you want the reader to get out of reading your book?
I tried to write the book in a way that if you are a gaming expert, I think you will really appreciate the breadth and how deep I go in some of these chapters about just criticizing games for their own sake. I think a lot of video game books Sometimes they're very well reported and have a lot of like business facts in them, but talk about the business too much, and they don't talk about the games enough. And like, these are like big reviews. It's talking about what I like about the game, as like a piece of art. I think if you are a gaming expert, you will appreciate that part of the book. I think if you don't know anything at all about video games, I think this is also a really great way to get everything you need to know of the past like 50 years in one book. Will get you up to speed on all the big stuff in a way that is approachable, that is not written like too like jargony. I think I explained the concepts pretty well. So I'm trying to serve as both ends of that spectrum. But what I want people to take away, and like with this preservation stuff, you may not be able to play all these games, but you can at least read about them. You can at least understand them. You can at least see that although video games are very modern and cutting edge and are all about like youthful energy, they also at this point have, again, they're older than me. They're older than a lot of people that play games. But a very long history now. It's very rich. That's very interesting. That's very worth exploring and learning more about. I just think if people in general are more educated about games, that is better for that's better for games' place in culture. The more people have a familiarity with them.
Yeah, that's a great. I love that you want to educate people about games because you start this book with Pac-Man, near the beginning where people till this day still go, games aren't just like Pac-Man anymore.
Yep.
I'm like I've been hearing this stupid saying since the '90s. I'm like, we haven't gone past that. So yeah, we could all learn more about video games. It'll be good, man. So yeah, Jordan, I want to thank you for being on tonight. This was such a cool interview. What is next for you?
I'm working on something. I can't talk about it. I'll tell you off camera if you want.
Yeah. We'll talk about
it. What's next for me? What's next for me? I'm going on my honeymoon in a few weeks. After been a lot of stuff going on with us, so finally having some rest. Belated, so it's a year belated. We got married a year ago, but then book, and then she graduated from law school, and all sorts of stuff happening. But now we're on our honeymoon, so
awesome. Yeah. I'm looking forward to video game of the year too. Jordan's Revenge.
Well, that'll be just oops on Nintendo.
Oops, good stuff, man. But yeah, Jordan, I want to thank you, man. This was cool. Where can people find you?
Find me on PCMag.com. That's where I work. I review games. I talk about technology and streaming services and all sorts of stuff. Follow me on all social media at this point at Jordan W. Miner, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, all that stuff. It's all Jordan W. Miner. And you can find, again, 300 pages of my game opinions and all this great art and all these contributors from across the industry, including you, Tony. Thank you again for being in the book. In Video Game of the Year, it is on sale right now. You can get it from wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can support an indie bookshop. That'd be cool to do as well. So check it out, please.
Yes, awesome stuff. All right, people, make sure you go out there and buy the book and stay tuned for another episode of Throwdown Interviews. This is going to be a lot of fun. I think this was a great way of starting to show off. So once again,
reach out to everybody else in the book. Just go down the list. Be like,
I should just do that, right? for the rest of the year, I'll just do that. I like that. All right, guys. So once again, I was your host, Tony Polanco, and I was joined by Emilio Lopez.
See you next time.
And Jordan Miner.
Peace.
All right, people. We'll see you around later.